Well, indeed. Now we are joined here tonight by Adam Berkowitz from Israel 365 News. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks so much, David. It's great to be here.
You're welcome, and it's great to have you with us because I know that you not only you work with Israel 365 News, but you're right there in the middle of the plans that are going on in Israel among the certain Third Temple advocate groups. And we would really firstly just we would just like to know what are the latest updates in terms of the development of the Third Temple.
Well, I think the biggest news, and I think it was, even though it was all over the world and everyone heard about it, I think the real implications were hugely um, underrated. Of the arrival of the red heifers in Israel. That's actually been under wraps. The people who are in charge of the red heifers are keeping it very low key. The reason is because there are a lot of people who don't want the red heifers to come back. And for various reasons, political reasons, because it would mean that now the Jews are totally able to begin the temple service. Um, and there's political implications and religious implications. So a lot of people are against it, and it would be very easy to stop that from happening. All you really have to do is go in with a sharp object, a nail, and walk up to the red heifer and poke a hole in it, or poke it, and you've then rendered it unfit to be used. So it's really incredibly simple. And I remember when they first started looking for the red heifer, they always kept the locations in Israel secret because they were afraid of, for example, the Shin Bet, the Secret Service, which is very left wing, somehow getting involved. Various religious groups, both Jewish and Christian. There are a lot of Jews who do not want the third temple to return, which I cannot understand. I mean, it's in the Bible, it's pretty clear. Um, and so there are a lot of reasons why people would not want it to happen. So they're keeping it very under wraps. There's going to be a Red Heifer Center opened up in Shiloh where the public can go see the red heifers and learn more about it. Which, I mean, we haven't had a red heifer in almost 2,000 years, so it would be a nice thing to learn about. The problem is Shiloh is in Samaria, and it's not really a lot of most tourists don't go there, even though it was the site of the tabernacle for 400 years. So it's a biblically significant place. So that's going to be opening up.
These are the red
Um,
heifers from Texas.
these are the red heifers from Texas Christians.
Right, I heard
It
about
was
this.
provided by Christians, which is also very interesting. There's a story in the Talmud about a red heifer being provided by a non-Jew. So that's it's not unprecedented. There's a precedent in the Talmud. It was very closely connected. It's an interesting story, closely connected to the commandment of honoring your father, which apparently the Talmud was trying to say that non-Jews are very strong in and should be honored for that. But these are the red heifers. There were five red heifers that came from Texas, um, pure, totally certified. The problem is that they may become unsuited if, for example, they grow hairs that are not red. And by the way, when we say red, um, the rabbinic teaching is that it's actually brown, a deep brown. So if you see them, they're not like bright orange or something like that. They're brown. It's a breed that is brown. That is brown.
So do
And
you think these are the archetype red heifers that you would need for the temple?
if they fulfill the requirements, then they're exactly what we need. Um, and there are five of them. So they just have to be checked. Checking them is not an easy deal. You have to inspect every hair on its body very closely, and the rabbis go over it with magnifying glasses from nose to the tip of the tail, and the hooves. The hooves are especially problematic, and it's a big animal. It's and as it's described in the Bible as a red heifer, and not a it's I'm sorry, not as a red heifer. In the Hebrew, it's a para aduma, which is a red cow, as opposed to an eglah, which is a calf. So it has to be 2 years and one day. And if I'm not mistaken, that's probably going to be around Passover time.
Okay, so
Um,
these red heifers are in Israel now, or are they still in Texas?
they are in Israel now. I was there in Tel Aviv at the airport when they came off the plane.
Oh wow.
And there's a lot of problems. Like, for example, they cannot have any wound or blemish, so they were not allowed to have ear tags. And as anyone who knows, who works with cows knows, as soon as the calf is born, you put in an ear tag, which puts a hole in its ear. But because of COVID, the person who was charged with who was the worker who put in the ear tags was not there for a week or two. So these particular calves did not get the ear tags. So, which is
Right.
really unusual. And so they were kosher. And then to transport them, the question was, how do you identify them? They need ear tags. They don't have ear tags. What can they do? So they put in RFIDs, chips under the skin. It's we're rediscovering we're rediscovering the wheel. It's really, everything has to be. We've never done this before. There was actually an experiment where they burned an entire cow with the wood to see how many ashes would be made and how many people could be purified by that. It's a whole big process.
How on earth do they
Um,
get those red heifers over to Israel on the plane? They a special type of plane for that?
no, 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 air freight, air freight.
Okay.
It's regular air freight, but they needed very special permission because importing livestock is really problematic for veterinary issues,
Yeah.
disease and whatnot. But they got the special permission. It wasn't cheap either, and like I said, it was a Christian Jewish joint effort. One
Now
of the things that
that's interesting to me.
it's very interesting.
Well, well, for one that comes into my mind is that Christians don't tend to think that, well, don't believe that sacrifices should come back because we
Sure.
believe that Jesus is the final sacrifice. So why do these Christians provide this red heifer for that?
Well, first of all, your statement is correct for a lot of Christians. But there are a lot of Christians in the world, and Christian theology is a lot more textured than many people realize. And I have spoken to Christian theologians who are very much on board with this. And So there are Christians who support this. From the Jewish side, we don't really need the red heifer, meaning, according to Jewish law, we can bring sacrifices that are time bound public sacrifices. That would be the daily sacrifices, the twice daily sacrifices, and it would also be the Passover offering. So for us, the only problem is we're not allowed to bring a sacrifice anywhere except the Temple Mount. Um, the voluntary offerings cannot be brought unless you're purified by a red heifer. And that what that means is that no Christians can bring sacrifices until the red heifer comes back.
But what are these
No,
sacrifices for? Are you talking about sacrifices for a festival or a full-blown sacrifice as a sin offering?
well, David, let's say you got a Lamborghini, or actually, let me say something I'd rather say. Let's say you had a baby boy, and that's something that made you really thrilled and delighted. I'm sure you would go to church and thank Jesus. But let's say you also wanted to bring a sacrifice to the God of Israel. What you would do is you would get on a plane, you'd come to Israel, you'd find a sacrifice that you want to bring, and you would bring it to your friend Adam Eliyahu, and we'd meet in Jerusalem, and you'd bring me your little lamb or your little sheep or your little goat or your turtle doves, and you'd say, "Could you do me a favor?" And I'd be like, of course, I'd love to do you a favor. I would take it up to the Kohen, and the Kohen would perform the sacrifice for you. And this was actually very, very common in the temple times. That people who were straight up idolaters would want a connection with the God of Israel, and they would do this. I don't think I don't. I mean, if you the God of Israel is the God that Jesus worshipped. So I mean, I don't want to impose any assumptions about your belief or theology, but in the temple times, straight up idolaters and people who weren't idolaters but just weren't Jewish would bring their sacrifices, would bring sacrifices to the temple, and the Jews would act as their intermediaries, as their kohanim, as their priests, and bring it up to the temple for them.
Well, for me, I would.
But that absolutely cannot happen until the red heifer comes back.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say absolutely. I believe in the God of Israel, and I believe that Jesus, Yeshua, is the God of Israel and His Son. But for me, I would say that it's absolutely fine to celebrate different things, including Jewish festivals and
Sure,
Hanukkah, if you want, or all those types of things. But
sure.
the line, which is what the Book of Hebrews in the New Testament talks about, the line is not going back to sacrifices for sins as a Christian, because Jesus is and
Well,
was that final
there were a
sin
lot of
offering.
different sacrifices. You said holidays. We can't. The only holiday offering we can bring right now, and actually the holiday offering that we are required to bring right now, but the government won't allow us to, is the Passover offering, which was not a sin offering. That was a Thanksgiving offering. And you can't, and because the only offerings I can bring right now are the twice daily offerings and the Passover offering. Anything other than that, I can't do. I cannot bring anything other than that. No holiday offerings, nothing. So there are some sacrifices that I should be making now, or that Israel should be making now, and those are the only ones we're allowed to make. So any offerings made by non-Jews would not be permitted right now because we don't have the red heifer.
Right, and with the Passover, the is it the cedar? You got the bread with the stripes and holes in it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that from my perspective of what I've seen, that represents the stripes and the piercing that was done to Jesus, Yeshua, on the cross, and how that's a memorial is symbolic to me and to others I know who are Christians.
Well,
Uh,
that's interesting because when I eat matzah on Passover, it doesn't have any stripes or holes. I on Passover I've taken on the custom of eating Yemenite matzah, and
okay,
Yemenite matzah actually looks like a pita bread. It's
okay,
smooth. It's smooth and no holes, no lines.
right,
Um,
that's
so
interesting.
it's yeah, it's like your Christian interpretation comes from an Ashkenazi tradition, but not from the biblical tradition. And it's pretty clear that the Yemenite version is much more is more close to the original matzahs. But
Interesting.
I don't mean in any way to
No,
denigrate
no,
her.
that's interesting to
Uh,
know. But for sure, the bread and the wine represents, as you know, in Christian communion, that's a
sure.
representation of Jesus's flesh and blood that he gave as a ransom for our sins on the cross. So
Okay.
yeah, but
Yeah.
no, it's interesting. Before we go on to some more of those topics, I just want to
It's
find out
it's to be
more.
honest, it can also equally represent the temple because in the temple they had the showbreads that were always present, which were essentially large matzahs that were folded. The showbreads were matzahs; they were unleavened. The only time leavened bread was brought into the temple was on Shavuot when they brought the 2 loaves of bread that had been rising since Passover, since the end of Passover, or since the beginning of Passover. But there was always the showbreads, and they had the water libation, the wine libations. The water libations were on Sukkot, but and Jesus was essentially connected to the temple. he was always hanging out in the temple, up and down, and doing the temple service. And
Yeah.
I mean, he did. I mean, the Last Supper was Passover, so it wouldn't be surprising to me that there's something, a very deep symbology, symbolism in Christianity connected to the temple, connected to to Passover and Jesus.
Well,
I
we also know that Jesus was in the temple at Hanukkah, which is something we're talking about on the
Oh,
show today.
right.
Yeah,
I don't know the details of that, but someone told me that recently, and I
the
was like,
Feast of
wow.
Dedication. Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
that's intense.
yeah.
Hanukkah, that's pretty intense, because Hanukkah is when we declare freedom from the Romans, and
Yes,
it's not
yes.
very theological. It's pretty political.
There's
It's,
there's the Maccabees, and as far as I understand it, the you don't really read the Second Maccabees, but
no,
it's
it's not in the canon. The
no, it's
Book
the
of
same for
Maccabees is
us.
not,
Yeah,
which is very, it's interesting.
yeah.
Um, I have
It's
friends
in
who learn
the
it.
Apocrypha. It's not in our Bibles either. But
Right,
yeah, it's an
right,
interesting story with Antiochus Epiphanes and how he desecrated the temple with the pig and yeah, the
right,
abomination.
right. That wasn't political either. That was religious.
Right.
That was religious. So yeah.
So can we touch on just as we started just the how close, Adam, do you think that you are in Israel to this third temple?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify a little. We don't need a temple. What we need is a temple service, and we don't need an actual structure for that. All we need is an altar, which is a pile of rocks, quite literally, and not even, bricks. You need plain, uncut rocks, and a pile of them, which I get a group of young men, hand them each a rock and say, start running. I once asked the rabbis from the Temple Institute, if Bibi Netanyahu woke up tomorrow morning and said, let's start the temple service, how long would it take to start it? It would take about 3 or 4 hours. Everything is ready. Everything is ready. There's a difference also between the temple as it was in when it was destroyed, or around and when it was in service, and what we need to start the temple service. All we need, like I said, is a temple of rocks. And what's disturbing is that when they came back from Babylon, um, they didn't build the temple, but they immediately began the temple service without the temple. And that's what we can do pretty much right now. We have the Kohanim. There's also in Jewish law, we have a concept of lechatchila and b'diavad. Lechatchila is under ideal circumstances, the ideal. If you wanted to build an ideal temple, versus b'diavad means, this is what you got, and is it acceptable? So to begin the temple service, we need an altar. We need, and it's okay to start the twice daily sacrifice without the red heifer in ritual impurity. If it's impossible to do the ritual impurity, then we can do the twice daily sacrifice. And we have the priests, we even have the utensils. They have to be dunked into a mikveh, into a ritual bath. We're literally 3 hours away if we get the go ahead. The only thing stopping us is the Israeli government.
Okay. And that's interesting you say that. So do you envisage an altar being built at some point in the near future?
It doesn't have to be built. We can put it up and then take it down right away. And it was actually done once in something that was very problematic, and something that a lot of Christians objected to. There was a Noahide offering done on the Mount of Olives by the Sanhedrin several years ago. And it was literally like that. A bunch of stones. We put up the bunch of stones, slaughtered a baby goat, and then burned it. And the person who slaughtered it was a non-Jew, because Jews are only permitted to do sacrifices in one place, which is on the Temple Mount. And Christians can do sacrifices or non-Jews rather, can do sacrifices anywhere they want except for the Temple Mount.
Well, this kind
Uh,
of goes with what I've seen in the Temple Institute, which is obviously one of the big temple organizations in Jerusalem. When I went to their tour, where they tell you what they're doing, they say that this temple is more than a building. It's about raising humanity to the next level, to a higher level, and it's not about the building to them. It's that philosophy is definitely in there. What would you say to that?
well, 4 years ago, I would say that was a lot of pretty words. But in the last 4 years, I think humanity has begun to show some very disturbing colors. Um, and I would say that's definitely true. Man made, man inspired institutions are failing in every way possible, basic institutions. The UN was supposed to be like the Sanhedrin, and the UN, oh my gosh, it is the voice of evil. It is the voice of everything that can be wrong and perverted about mankind. The UN has taken on. I mean, as an American, I look at America, and the basic institutions for justice have been perverted and failed miserably. Um, we saw what happened when with even the practical things like medicine failed failed society miserably. In the last, I've been expecting that, if we amongst my friends, we say, if there's going to be another Holocaust, it'll be in America. And we've been saying that, and I mean, we logically and intellectually reasoned that that was the case, but 1 month ago or 2 months ago, I don't know, it's been 50 days, I think, since October 7th. Um, I just, you saw the burning embers of anti Semitism burst into flame. I just never, and no one, the Jews around the world are shocked. They're stunned that anti-Semitism burst out full on, worse than pre-war Germany, in a matter of 1 week or even less. I think that man-made institutions have failed, and I think the Temple Institute was absolutely correct. The only hope of society is Jerusalem, and I'm not talking about Judaism or Jewish. Um, it was Jerusalem is an international city. It really is, but not in the way that the UN intended. On Sukkot, all of the nations came up to Jerusalem. Solomon, he connected all nations, and he never lifted a finger. He never did a war. It was through peace. He said, "Look, let's live together. Let's flourish together. Let's build a temple. You can go, be whatever you are, but we have to agree on the basis of humanity."
Yeah, I
And
can
the ba-
understand what you're saying, and I totally agree with the rise of the evil we see in the world, especially what happened, the terrible things that happened in October, and the subsequent movements across the world
where they're
have been,
cheering it on. It's
yeah. And but the thing is, to me, on the back of that, and that's very true what you're saying. But my concern is, what about Babylon? What about this whole concept of uniting the world and its relation to when that's happened in the past in terms of the Tower of Babel and the philosophies that may come
mm,
across a bit new age?
oh,
Uh,
absolutely. You're right. I mean, there's what we call batikun and bakilkul, something that is done for fixing and something that's done for breaking, and it can be something that looks very similar. So, for example, there's a difference between unity and New World Order. Okay, um, and I think that's what you're touching on. Is there is I mean, we have to agree on basic concepts. We have to, and they are religious. We don't have to all be one religion, but we have to agree that there is a God and that He requires us certain things. He requires us not to glorify murder. He requires us to advance justice. He requires us. These are the basic Noahide laws. He requires us not to walk up to an animal and rip off its limb to eat. These are the basic laws of the Noahide laws. But at the same time, we're not talking about a new world order where the laws, the ideas behind the new world order are not to advance man. They don't speak to the higher aspects of man, the aspect of man that's created in God's image. The new world order actually relates to the opposite, even though it looks the same. Even though they're talking about unity, they're talking about unity in a way that destroys man.
Yeah,
Um,
I can understand the sentiment behind it. Um, for me, I would pose the question, and I know there's a lot of people listening that may want me to also pose this question, but how do you know if this figure turns up at the time of the temple? How do you know that this leader, which some may say this is the Messiah in their view, how do you know that this figure is not going to be a deceiver? How, how are
hmm.
you? Have you contemplated maybe that a figure may turn up who claims to be the Messiah and is actually the opposite?
Well, first of all, in Judaism, there is no concept of the deceiver or the antichrist. In Islam, there is a very strong concept of the antichrist. There's also a concept of how Jesus figures into the final days. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Medina, where Muhammad is buried, next to his grave is an open grave, and that open grave is prepared for Jesus because they say that Jesus never died. He went up to heaven alive, and in the end of days, he will come down to kill anyone who does not convert to Islam, and then his reward for that will be to be buried next to Muhammad in Medina. There's also, yeah, and that's actually being yelled out more now in since the war in Gaza. They see this as the pre. They also have a concept of Gog and Magog, and they see this as Gog and Magog. Um, but we don't have the concept of the Antichrist, but obviously, the elephant in the room. Jews have been deceived by um, false messiahs in the past, and so we're very cautious of people claiming to be the Messiah. In that regard, I'm not referring to Jesus because he was never accepted by the Jewish people as Messiah,
Well,
though there were
some,
false Messiahs.
some,
Most. Okay, some. Okay.
yeah.
It's really.
Obviously, the first followers of Jesus were Jewish,
Oh,
but
obviously, and
yeah,
what was very sweet was the first followers of Jesus for a long time actually coexisted in Israel with other Jews without proselytizing, and they were accepted as Jews who happened to believe that Jesus was Messiah, and that did not preclude them from being part of the Jewish nation. Judaism is primarily ethnic, with an inherent and implicit belief system. So they were accepted as part of the Jewish nation and lived in Israel,
well, as
mostly
far as I know about the history,
mostly in the area that I live in today.
right, yeah, the early Christians were persecuted. The early Jewish believers in Jesus, the early Christians, they were persecuted, and then at some point the
By
tables
the
turned.
Jews,
Oh, like the Romans and
right? By the Romans, by the
some.
Romans,
I think there were
because
some that
because
persecuted
the early
Christians.
Christians were still considered monotheistic, and the Romans were idolatrous polytheistic, which is why they also persecuted Jews.
But then after the time of Constantine, the tables turned, and then
Right,
actually the
right,
Jews were more
right. That's why I
persecuted.
said the first Christians. They
Yeah,
were very much a part of the Jewish people,
right.
very much
But
so.
as I'm sure you may be aware, that some Christians, including myself, have the theology where the eschatology, where we believe that there will be a false Christ, an antichrist,
Right,
who will take
right.
seat in that temple.
And a false temple, yeah.
Yeah.
and that's like I said, I have a very dear friend. His name is John Anderson. He's the Christian director for Cry for Zion, and apparently that belief um, is misunderstood by some Christians and not universally accepted. Um, so I mean, Christianity is huge, and it's not like, two or three, simple statements and you're done. It's a complicated theology. So different, there's different
Well,
beliefs
we
in,
believe in this figure that will claim to be God himself, in a
right,
similar way to what we were talking about with Antiochus Epiphanes back in the Maccabees, um,
right.
that
But
he claimed to
In
be God
Judaism,
manifest.
The Messiah is not divine. The
So,
Messiah,
so what are the protocols you're looking for in a Messiah?
yeah, that's a good question. Um, one of the false messiahs we had was a man called Bar Kokhba, who
Yeah,
led the revolt.
right.
His name was, oh gosh,
Simon.
I, no, 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 his family name.
Ah,
His name was changed to, Bar Kosiva. He
okay.
was Bar Kosiva, and Rabbi Akiva believed him to be Messiah, which that's something. But Rabbi Akiva was a heavy hitter. And so he changed his name to Bar Kokhba, which means the son of the star, because according to Maimonides, according to the Rambam, as per Bilam's prophecy of the Star of Jacob, um, a a Messiah must be preceded by a star, which you believe in as well.
Bethlehem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, which
absolutely.
showed up, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem. His
Yeah,
mother traveled from Nazareth, which is up north, down to Bethlehem, which is in Judea, and in order to fulfill the prophecy, and there was a star.
yeah.
So without the star, there's no Mashiach. Also, the word Mashiach literally means anointed.
Hmm.
So he has to be anointed. The question is who anoints him.
Like in the time
Um,
of David and Saul.
well, there's a different kind of anointing that's being done for kings, an
Right,
anointing that's done for the Cohen,
right.
for the high priest. Um, he has to be an observant Jew or observe the mitzvahs. He has to be very righteous. Also, we have a two-stage Messiah. We have what's called Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David.
Right.
Mashiach ben Yosef it's not even a person. It's a practical historical process, which many rabbis hold that we've just finished.
Well,
It's
I believe Jesus is both of those. It's actually one person.
okay, right? I hear that.
Right.
Um,
Because
and
he returns as king. The first time he came was the suffering servant. The second time he comes
oh, that's
is
interesting. So you're saying the two stages that we describe, you're saying are still two stages, but embodied
yeah,
in one person, embodied in
absolutely,
Jesus.
absolutely, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. It's very interesting. I mean, it's not
So
surprising. I mean,
because the Pharisees, the Jews at the time that Jesus was here, they were looking for that military leader,
right.
and
And
so that's why.
that would be Messiah from Joseph.
Yeah, and that picture when the Jesus on the cross, to them that seemed like it wasn't the Messiah because they were expecting a Messiah to come to lead them against the Romans, which is what the false Messiah Bar Kokhba ended up doing after Jesus came. Uh,
Failing
and
at.
yeah, and Jesus warned of,
We also had a guy named Shabtai Tzvi.
oh yeah,
Uh,
the
I forget when
Sabbat
he was, but he also failed.
the Sabbateans and all of that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we've had that's what I was referring to. Bar Kokhba and Shabtai Ben Tzvi. I was referring to them when I was referring to the false messiahs.
right.
We've made mistakes,
Yeah.
and so we're kind of a little bit very reluctant because of that.
Well, I believe that when Jesus returns, there's the prophecy in Zechariah that they will look upon him whom they've pierced and weep and mourn, and that Jesus returns as we said, as that conquering king who conquers the Antichrist, conquers the world system comes back and establishes his reign from Jerusalem and the millennial reign. So,
See, Jews have a different requirement or a different methodology. We're required to do commandments, to do mitzvahs, and God has His job. So, so we're not making any decisions. We're just doing the work. And I mean, basically, that's how Israel came to be, which is the manifestation of prophecy. So when it happens, we'll see. You know, when it happens, we'll see. I'm not going to argue yes or no right now. I'm just going to do my job.
well, see, for me, it's very interesting because when I've had these conversations, like with Rabbi Weiss and others, it's very interesting how when he describes the coming Messiah that he's expecting to come to the temple, he's actually describing Jesus, but in a different way because he doesn't recognize Jesus as the Messiah, so therefore he's applying the same prophecies to this other figure. And what my concern is that through doing that, there could easily be a figure that comes and claims to be the Messiah, fulfilling all of those types of prophecies, but is actually a dictator who ends up turning on the very people that thought he was the one. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, but I mean, we've been very stubborn for thousands of years. We've not accepted Jesus. We've not accepted anyone else. We've not become Muslim. A lot of Jews are falling by the wayside, and they're clearly not the chosen people. Um, they've become Buddhists, they've become whatever they become, atheists, liberals. Um, I doubt very much that we're going to accept the false Messiah, at least not easily. Uh, I mean, we Jews can't agree on anything, you know. And I can, so I mean, it's basically like I said, we're just doing our job, doing what we're supposed to do, and when it comes, it comes. When the time comes, the time comes. Jews have a very different approach to prophecy. For example, I've spoken to Christians about Gog and Magog. Um, and they get very uptight about it. They're like, "Oh, Gog and Magog, the end of days, apocalypse," and I'm like, "We have a different relationship with God. We've been through some really horrible things, horrible. Almost every generation has been through something horrible.
Right.
And first of all, we get through it because we're the Jews, and God promised us that we will always be around. And the second reason is, I mean, from the beginning, from Abraham, from Jacob, our attitude has been, we know what God says, and we'll work it out with Him. You know,
Well, and
well,
this is something I want to touch on briefly, actually, because it is very important that I'm. I want to confess to you that throughout history there have been some terrible times uh, and terrible things that have been done in the name of Jesus that were not of his nature. And that's something I want to expressly vocalize that I think it's time that Christians represent Jesus properly and his love and what he did for each and every one of us in coming to this world to rescue us and ransom us from our sins. And I think it's important to say that what's been done in the name of Christianity, when it's been like that, when it's just been horrible, horrific stuff in the past, it's not a true reflection of the gospel. And so I just want to sort of put out that um, to you to basically say that I'm aware of that, it's not a true reflection of the gospel and God's love in Christ to rescue people from their sins, and especially the Jewish people, because as far as I'm concerned, Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. And so I just want to put that out there to you.
I'm so profoundly humbled by what you just said. It's one of the most beautiful testaments of faith that I've ever heard. If your belief in Jesus brought you to that, then it's a beautiful thing. It's a powerful thing. It's a godly thing. Um,
Have
I
you
mean,
had
really,
anyone else say that before?
not in precisely those words, but I am seeing an awakening among Christians. As soon as they realize what has been done in the name of Jesus, and they realize that it's not an expression of how they relate to Jesus, how they view Jesus, I see some beautiful things. I mean, Jews have always been alone. Bilam also said that, we're going to be a nation alone. And we have been. And now, even though we're seeing these horrible times where people are idiots, insane people are out in the streets again screaming for the blood of Jews, all of a sudden, for the first time in 2,000 years, for the first time maybe ever, Jews have an ally, Jews have a friend, Jews have a brother. Christians who are willing to stand alongside of us and say, I am a Christian. I have this faith in Jesus, and my belief in Jesus compels me to stand with the Jews. It's the first time in history, dude. It's like, and it's really what you just said. I'm struggling not to break out crying. That was an expression of your faith in Jesus, your belief in Jesus, your perception of Jesus, your relationship with Jesus. It's incredibly profound, and it's the first time in history, which makes me believe maybe we're getting somewhere, or some of us are.
Well, I don't know if you've heard of Corrie Ten Boom.
Of course,
So there
of
there were
course.
there were some that stood
You know,
and put their
it's
neck on the line, but overall there was a lot of churches that didn't intervene in that horrific time in Germany.
right.
But there were some.
There were some, and I mean the Balfour Declaration. I, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, so I sometimes I'm not so smart, but my not so smartness will sometimes lead me to some interesting insights. One day I realized, hey, the Balfour Declaration was during World War One, not after the Holocaust. The entire Christian movement to bring the Jews back to Israel, and it was a Christian movement. Theodor Herzl, one of his closest friends, I'm very bad at names, was a Christian pastor who believed that the Jews had to come back to Israel. And the entire movement that led to the Balfour Declaration, the Christian movement in England to bring the Jews back to Israel, was not out of guilt for the Holocaust. It was Christians who felt that as Christians, they should help the Jews come to Israel. And I think that's happening again. And all this thing, it's centered around Israel. The Jews cannot be a light unto the nations if we're out there among the nations. We have to, when we're in Israel, we can relate to the world as we're supposed to. We can be a priestly nation. We can be a light unto the nations if we're here. If we're here, and I think a lot of anti-Semitism came from anger that the Jews were not doing what we should be doing. We weren't performing our function, and we couldn't do it while we were in the exile. And now that we're back here, the third temple isn't going to be a synagogue for Jews. It's going to be a house of prayer for all nations. And we're going to be the priests. We're going to serve. That's what a priest does. He's not a king. He's not exalted. And even the king serves. But I think that now that we're back in Israel, we can perform our function. our functions.
You know what I like? I like the zeal, and that's something I've seen in some great people I've spoken to, like yourself and others. I love the zeal, and I think that's something that's inherently seen in the New Testament. I think that's something that's inherently seen in Paul, the Apostle Paul, who was obviously from the tribe of Benjamin.
Mm.
And also, we see in our eschatology in the Bible that 144,000 of the 12 tribes come to faith and spread the gospel across the world. So I know this zeal, and I've seen it, is so powerful and so important. And that's something that is to be treasured and celebrated. Um, the problem is when that, as the Bible says in the New Testament, that zeal is not according to knowledge. In the New Testament, we see how zeal can also go the wrong way when it's not based on truth as well. And for me, it's just I love to see it, and I'm confident that in God's timing, the remnant of Israel will come to Him through His way of salvation. And I want to put that to you as well. That's something I see on the horizon.
Okay. I mean, I love you. I think you're wonderful. I think that any connection between you and me, that's that's a spiritual godly connection and can really bring out a lot of things. And I apologize if this sounds um, not nice or negative anyway, but I'm not going to accept Jesus ever. I was born a Jew. It's my essential identity. It's not a matter of belief or faith. Um,
Do you just out of interest on this conversation? I'm certainly not here to force anyone to, belief is something that has to be a personal choice, a personal decision. But do you see coming to faith in Yeshua? Do you feel that that would make one less Jewish?
I think it would be a dereliction of my duty. I stood at Mount Sinai and God gave me the Torah personally. Um, and I have to keep the Torah. I was at the covenant, I was in the covenant, or I'm part of the covenant of Abraham. And that covenant is very much about the land and about the nation and the people. God brought us out of Egypt as a nation. Um, I think it would be a dereliction of my duty as a Jew. Maybe we need Christians to believe in Jesus. I don't know, but I know that as a Jew, I have a different duty. I mean, the commandments. We're not talking about, good deeds. Good deeds are nice. Commandment is you don't have much choice. Like it or not, you have to do it. It's my job. When God brought us out from Egypt, He didn't set us free. He took possession of His people. We're now God's slaves. Moses was the slave of God. So I have to do this. It's my duty, and I can't walk away from it.
So, what do you think? Because you mentioned earlier about the Star of Bethlehem. What do you think when you see in the New Testament these prophecies that we've talked about fulfilled in the text, in the person of Jesus?
Well, there's different ways. When I read the New Testament and you read the New Testament, we have very different experiences. When Jesus is baptized, you see Jesus being baptized by, like John told him. When I see Jesus getting baptized, I see a Jewish man jumping into the mikveh and getting ready to do godly service, usually in the temple. When I see um, when I see in the New Testament they talk about the Son of God, we have the concept Son of God. We're all Son of God. It means something very different. The kingdom of heaven. When we read the Kriyat Shema twice a day, we're accepting the kingship of God. There are basic concepts in the New Testament that come from Judaism, which is not surprising. One of them being that there's going to be a star. Why do you think there's the Star of Bethlehem? Why do you think it was significant enough to be written in the New Testament? Because it meant something. My difficulty comes when they try to make verses in the prophets fit the story of Jesus. That's a bridge too far for me. But there are a lot of basic concepts in the New Testament that come from Judaism, and it's very nice for me. When Jesus is walking around in a wheat field on Shabbat and he plucks wheat, he's not saying don't keep the Sabbath. What he's saying is, I have a tradition that being very hungry is a mortal danger, and you're allowed to break Shabbos in order to save your life. And in this case, that means plucking wheat, which is forbidden on Shabbos. You can do that if you're really, really hungry, because that's a mortal danger. That's how I understand that. But he certainly did not violate Shabbat, and certainly did not come to say Shabbat is no longer necessary. He just had a different interpretation of Shabbat, which is actually very Jewish.
Right, and so
The
so you
rabbis are always arguing about that.
so
So I
you
have a
you
very
do you see the Jewishness of Jesus
oh
pulsating
uh, oh
through the
absolutely,
right.
absolutely, 1,000%. He even the way they discuss things, it was very it reminded me of all my study of the Talmud. It's so similar. It's in the same style. It's just Jesus was from a specific school of thought that
But the
was
but the
thoroughly within Judaism. I
as I'm
mean,
sure
did
you
the
know, the heart of the gospel is that those good works cannot save you, only by faith, like Abraham believed, and that was
that's
accounted as righteousness.
yeah. That's also a Jewish concept. I have a question. For example, um, when did the followers of Jesus stop keeping Shabbat and start observing the Sabbath on Sunday?
That's a big discussion, even in
Right, it
Christian
is.
communities. There's the Seventh Day Adventists that say that Rome put it on Sunday, and therefore they changed. But there's also the references in the New Testament about the Lord's Day, and they were worshiping in the Spirit in the Lord on the Lord's Day, and
Really?
the first day of the week, because I don't. I think, as far as I know, the Jewish people continued keeping that day, but also they had the worship on Sunday because it was related to his resurrection, Jesus' resurrection, and the
You're talking
Lord's
about the first Christians.
yeah, the Lord's Day became.
Right.
I've read accounts from early church fathers that were talking about
Right, I've heard
worshiping
that as well.
yeah,
It's just the question is, like, at what point did it become did they veer off on the major things? Shabbat is a very big thing with us. It's like
yeah.
really, really. I
And
don't know
I
if you've
don't,
ever.
I, I personally do not think there's any problem. I know that the Messianic Jewish believers keep, they worship on a Saturday as well, and there's absolutely no problem. One doesn't lose their culture because they become a believer in Yeshua. The Jewish believers are still very Jewish in terms of their festivals. They meet together on a Saturday. The main difference it really is not seeing those things as a work to earn salvation. Um, whereas the
Well,
gospel is by grace through faith.
we don't either. We don't keep a tally of our mitzvahs so that, when we go up to heaven, we'll say, look, I scored I scored a 613. Don't I get in? We don't do that. There's the ultimate goal, which is attaching yourself to Hashem and doing Hashem's will. Um, I mean, there's a reason why He sends us into the world to do His will in this world, and that's more than just intention, but it's also intention. When you do a commandment, there are two aspects to the commandment. There's the physical action of the commandment, and there's also the intention of doing it, and you need both.
So what do you think about, just before we finish, because we've almost been chatting for about an hour, so we'll
Yeah,
finish
I
in a
mean,
few minutes. It's been brilliant, absolutely
uh,
brilliant to talk to
oh
you.
really? I
Yeah,
think so. I think so too. You totally floored me. My gosh, you blew me away. Um,
thank God.
there's changes. There's changes happening within the Christian world, and when I connect with Christians, I try to encourage, but not to push or pull. So something like that, what you just said about Christian history with Jews, it's I mean, it's certainly not going to make you Jewish, but it's certainly going to make you a better Christian, a better relationship with Jesus. And if that's what it is, then I'd love to encourage it.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's very important to be open about the mistakes that have been made in terms of the persecution, and even Martin Luther, who I respect on many levels in terms of the Reformation and coming away from Rome, but there were mistakes made at the end of his life, which sadly laid the groundwork in
I
Germany for
think
some of those
I,
things.
I
And
feel like there's a new Reformation happening, like Reformation Stage Two, reloaded, amongst a lot of Christians. And like I said, I can't touch that. I can't push, pull. I have no input. I'm just watching it, and it's very interesting. I think the creation of the state of Israel, which is like a mind-numbing manifestation of prophecy in on a level and in that's so unprecedented in human history, something that no one ever thought could happen, that you'd read the Bible and you'd say, come on, no way, no way the Jews are coming back to Israel. Look at them, they're in these little ghettos all over Europe. They're certainly not ever going to make it back to Israel, and here we are, and we're protecting ourselves in a way that, I mean, we have an army, and it's the manifestation of prophecy. And I think it had a profound effect on many Jews, though not all of them. Some Jews have inured themselves and are absolutely unaccepting of this massive change, which should have changes in our theology and even in our practical ways we perform the commandments. But I'm sure it also had a deep and a profound effect on Christianity. That
as you say, there was a lot of Christians involved. I mean, I even think about
Oh yeah,
Charles Spurgeon in the 1800s was already saying that the Bible says that the nation of Israel will come back, and absolutely, a lot of Christians
and
saw
I've
that.
heard it said amongst a lot of Israelis that were it not for the Christian support of Israel, there would be no Jews in Judea and Samaria or Jerusalem right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's entirely thanks to the Christian support,
Right.
which is stunning. Which is stunning.
So I want to just pose a couple of a question to you before we finish. Uh, you say about the unity, and I think that's good on many levels. For me, it's good to build those bridges, as we were saying before, uh, but not at the compromise of the gospel. Um, when we talk about Jesus, you say about some of the prophecies, and the thing I would pose to you is also this: when Jesus made statements like "Before Abraham was, I am," and the crowd at that time knew exactly what Jesus meant, that he was describing his deity, because I am obviously is the name given that God showed of himself in the Old Testament.
Hmm.
And when Jesus said things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me. Now, really, from my perspective, we have to make a choice when we read what Jesus said there. Either it's not true and he's a false prophet, or it is true and he is who he said he is. So, where would you fall on that proposition? Would you say Jesus is a real, true prophet and who he said he is, the Son of God, God come to earth in the Messiah? Or would you say that that's patently false? How would you respond to that question? And I know it's a very pointed question. I just want to.
I appreciate the pointedness of it. Um, I'm just always perplexed that for some reason there are Christians who their belief in Jesus seems to be dependent on my belief in Jesus. Whether or not I accept Jesus should have no influence, effect, implications for you. I know I don't see Jesus as the Messiah or as the manifestation of prophecy, but that should certainly not have any effect on you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah. Like we were saying
yeah,
earlier, that it's if you're.
I've met with you in Jerusalem. Come to Jerusalem. Come to Jerusalem. Pray to Jesus. Welcome.
And do you
I'll stand.
think that.
I'll stand right next to you and pray towards the Temple Mount. Pray to the God of Israel.
Do you think that that will have any effect on the views of the temple? Um, because you talked about the Noahide, and I know that one of those is about not allowing blasphemy to the temple crowd. Wouldn't that be a blasphemy if or considered
I,
idolatry?
right. That's more precisely that there's that idolatry is forbidden. And Jewish law is a very serious study, and I mean we've had a lot of times to work this through. My understanding is that you have to define what idolatry is, and most modern halachic authorities do not consider Christianity to be idolatry. Let's leave Catholicism out of the picture for now.
Mm.
It's not idolatry, and even if it is, there are different practical implications. If it is, let's say it is, even if you hold by the minority opinion that it is, well, what does that mean? It's actually not. It's what we refer to in Jewish law as shituf, meaning having an intermediary between man and God, and that's forbidden for Jews, but permitted for non-Jews. There's no the prohibition against idolatry in the Noahide laws um, does not include um, worshiping Jesus for Christians, because you are ultimately worshiping Jesus and the God of Jesus, who was the God of Israel. So it would be idolatrous for me as a Jew, as a born Jew, to use an intermediary, namely Jesus, to worship the God of Israel. But it is not a prohibition for you to use that intermediary, even if you consider that intermediary to be divine. And that is the minority opinion. The majority opinion is that even if it is, it's not idolatry, not for me or not for you. So it's not really, being Christian is not the prohibition of idolatry. There was a time when it was only Catholicism that it quite probably was, and that was, the whole concept of being an iconoclast, that they have had and have um, idols, literally idols and icons. That's something that you do not have, as I understand. So that's the strict Jewish law. I'm speaking to on a rabbinic level. So the Noahide laws would not prohibit you from praying to Jesus. They would prohibit me from praying to Jesus.
Thank you, Adam. Adam
Did I
Berkowitz.
did I explain that well? It's a complicated matter.
You did. It's a very complicated matter, but yeah, it's. I just wanted to get clarification on that, and I know a lot of others listening
To,
would too.
to be
Um,
honest, the Islam is not considered idolatry on any level. They just have a problem with uh, with murder, with spilling blood. That's the big problem that they would have insofar as following the Noahide laws.
right, and we in our in prophecy we see that there's this one world system that comes in the end times, and there's going to be a lot of deception.
God
There's
forbid.
going to be a lot of delusion,
God forbid.
and we believe that there's going to be this figure who we call the Antichrist, and I believe that's what's going to happen. But I also think that there's I also believe from what I read in the Bible that there's going to be some wonderful things too, and that many people will come to the God of Israel through his Mashiach.
Hopefully, those wonderful things will include you visiting the Golan and joining me in a cup of coffee.
I would love to come and see you if I end up back in Israel again.
Serious
And
invitation, dude. Serious invitation.
yeah, maybe we could sit down and chat some more. There's so many things we can talk about, and we've covered a lot tonight. And
Thank
I
God.
really appreciate you coming on, Adam Berkowitz. It's been fantastic to speak to you, and hopefully we'll do it again.
God willing. God willing.
God bless. Thank you for coming on to Rise Radio tonight.
God bless you too, man.